Hey, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the show. If you've been enjoying some of my episodes, please leave a rating and review on iTunes. But if you're new to the show and you're wondering what the heck do we talk about on this podcast, man, we go in deep, really dissect and try to understand what actually goes into a successful crowdfunding campaign. Really, I try to bring on real world guests, people that are raising money every single week when it comes to crowdfunding. These people are executing, they're taking action, they're sharing exactly what is happening behind the scenes with you. So in terms of the tactics they're using to get funding, how are they attracting backers, things when it comes to actually getting a project launched, building a prototype or building a product from scratch, and really actually, I think how to make a bang, right? If you're trying to actually do something, you're trying to launch a new brand, this can be an incredible way to do that. And we actually brought on a podcast guest today. I had an incredibly successful recent Kickstarter campaign at over 2,700 plus backers, a six-figure campaign. You're going to hear more about that on the podcast, as well as some of their experiences and some of their lessons and takeaways. So this is a great example, I think, of really anyone out there can raise funding when it comes to crowdfunding. It doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what stage of creator you are, if it's your first time or if it's your 10th time, you can go out there and you can raise funding from the crowd. Now, when I first started to say that, and I got into the industry back in 2012, I started to talk about this and how so many people were taking advantage of crowdfunding. All of a sudden, everyone was like, no way, there's no way, Sal, that actually is happening. So I realized I had to actually start documenting this and providing evidence. And that's one of the things that I do with this podcast is sharing with you that people every single day are being successful with crowdfunding. And why not you? Why aren't you that next success story? I also do that as well when it comes to my blog, crowdcrux.com. I also do that with my YouTube channel. I also do that with other free information that I put out there on the web, just to really just show you and kindle a fire that not only is this possible, but there is a how-to. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? You can go out there, you can listen to some of these episodes or check out my YouTube channel or check out my blog, and you can learn more about how to actually sink your teeth into this, actually understand the strategy and the tactics to doing this, and that this is something that I'm really working to demystify for you. So one of the first steps I'd say for anyone who's a beginner to learn a little bit more about this is that I have a great book out there. This book I've worked so freaking hard on to really coalesce a body of knowledge when it comes to this industry. So these are very hard word lessons in the trenches, as well as things that I think that most people don't even know about when it comes to doing a Kickstarter campaign or doing a crowdfunding campaign. I call this the Kickstarter launch formula because it literally is a formula that you can just follow step by step, and it's designed to get you a result. And that's really to get you the funding, but really actually even go beyond that, to blow past your funding goal when it comes to a Kickstarter campaign, no matter what type of product you have, no matter where you are, no matter what type of individual you are when it comes to your skill set. This book is designed to not only work for you, but also so that way when you actually get out there and you actually get some funding, you feel a little bit more confident going throughout the process. I know that in my own life, when I felt like I had access to the know-how, the step-by-step, when I actually knew what I was doing, I felt way more confident about the process. So that sounds like something that you might be interested in. I'm going to share with you a link, which will actually take you to Audible, where you can listen to me read this book with my passion, with my enthusiasm. And if you want to, you can even get a free copy. You can get a free copy as well. And this is a promo that's going on with Audible. And I don't know how long that promo is lasting. If you sign up for a free 30-day trial of Audible, you also get a copy of the Kickstarter launch formula. So go to this link at crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. That link is crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio, and you can learn more. Again, that link is crowdcrux, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. You can learn more about my book there. In addition, at the end of this episode, I will share some more great, valuable resources for you. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode and discover how this creator was able to smash through their goals and do a six-figure crowdfunding campaign. It's coming up right after this. If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured, I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfill Right, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillright.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist. fulfillright.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Hey, we have an incredible creator on the show who's launched many different campaigns. At my count, I think there's about 19 campaigns that this individual has launched. In addition, the recent campaign has attracted more than 136,000, more than 2,200 backers, and we are privileged enough to have this creator today here on the show. Ray, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Definitely, man. Let's get started. Maybe you could just kind of talk to the listeners a tiny bit. Tell them just a tiny bit about your experience with Kickstarter, and then we can get into your current project.
Sure. So I was actually an early adopter from the backer end of Kickstarter back in 2009, 2010 when they first launched, because I happened to be a film student at NYU Film. And film students are always looking for funding and finding creative ways to fund their student films. And when Kickstarter first came along, a number of my classmates started campaigns back in that year one, year two phase. So I knew about Kickstarter right from the launch. And fast forward a couple of years after graduation, my partner and I found ourselves with a script that we wrote, a screenplay, and no idea where to go with it because it was very expensive, big budget, tentpole, summer blockbuster type of screenplay, Skies of Fire. And we knew that we didn't have the connections or the wherewithal to really make this into a movie at the time. So we asked ourselves what we could do, and we decided that we wanted to turn it into a comic. We put together a pitch package that included the first 5 completed pages, and we looked into the process of submitting to various publishers. But at the same time, we noticed that comics were burgeoning on Kickstarter. And the more we looked into it, the more it made sense for us to go on Kickstarter for the first issue, because we realized we could publish the first issue with the help of crowdfunding independently, and that wouldn't preclude any selling of rights, so that we could always go back to a major publisher should they be interested afterwards. And that's how we got started. So we launched our first Kickstarter back in 2014. We raised about 15 grand, over 500 backers. That was more success than we could have ever dreamed of. And it felt like a monumental seismic shift in our careers. And it felt like we could really do this professionally from then on out.
Did you ever imagine that you would be on your 19th campaign, doing it until now after that first campaign?
Not at all. Honestly, even from the early days, I was a bit pessimistic. I thought that crowdfunding was experiencing a bit of a gold rush and that maybe it would just as suddenly evaporate one year. I've been telling Vince and that since 2014, and I've been proven pretty wrong, though, the fragmenting of the crowdfunding scene recently, I don't know, it might change in the next couple of years. Who knows?
And for you, do you view yourself as the brains behind this in terms of marketing, or is it for you more about the creation and the creativity? How do you view yourself when it comes to your role within these projects?
Sure. I think it's a little bit of both. So while in film school, I always took on the role of a producer. A producer in film is the one who usually puts together the project, chiefly in short films like we did at NYU. They're in charge of scheduling and budgeting and putting together a prospectus to find in-kind donations and funding. So a lot of those skills translated when we went to Kickstarter. Putting together the campaign page is basically putting together a prospectus. And I've always viewed crowdfunding as a means to fulfill my creative endeavors, but it kind of has evolved over the years to really getting to know those skills of marketing, business, savvy, so on and so forth. And I think that it's something that comes a little naturally to me. So I'm happy to develop those skills and to continue pushing a path forward for those creative endeavors.
Very cool. And is this now your full-time pursuit, or is this something that is your passion project? How would you categorize this?
I would say it's my half-time pursuit. So I am actually also an educator. I teach on the weekends primarily at a center called Breakthrough Training Center located in my hometown of Arcadia, California, where we focus on unlocking students' potential and their purpose. So we teach cross-disciplinary project-based learning classes like entrepreneurship, ironically enough, Model UN, nonfiction writing, stuff like that. And that's a real joy, but it only takes up my weekends. So the majority of my weeks are focused on our creative endeavors, crowdfunding, and so on and so forth.
Very cool, very cool. So let's talk just a tiny bit about this project which you recently launched. Can you describe that a bit to the listeners and also what they can expect from this one?
Sure. So The Skies of Fire is our original Kickstarter comic. It is a diesel punk airship adventure of loyalty and revenge. It follows an ambitious captain as she assembles a crew and hunts down a pirate terrorizing her kingdom. And it is the culmination of the last 8 years of comics that we've done on Kickstarter. So when we launched in 2014, we launched only for the first issue, which was about 28 pages. And we wanted to launch for the entire run of the comic, which ended up encompassing 8 issues. But looking at Kickstarters that were trying to accomplish that at the time, we knew that there was a large amount of risk because we were unknown creators. We didn't have an established fan base. And based off of our budget estimates, we would need something like $40,000 of crowdfunding just to get it through. And then given the pace of creation, we weren't sure when we were going to be able to fulfill that. So while doing our research, we saw a couple of comic campaigns that had successfully funded, but also just sort of ghosted after 6 months. And we didn't want to do that. So we decided to focus on the first issue. And 8 years later, we finally finished all 8 issues that encompass the original series. And this campaign is collecting those 8 issues into 2 beautiful hardcovers plus a slipcase. So in a way, this is the original campaign we wanted to launch back when we started crowdfunding, but weren't able to, but now finally are.
Very exciting, very exciting. So I'm kind of curious, you having done a bunch of these different projects, do you still feel anxiety before going live with a campaign? What is it like before you actually hit that launch button the night before or kind of gearing up to that?
I definitely can't sleep the night before. I sleep very lightly. It seems that my internal clock always just wakes me up because I like launching very early. I'm on the West Coast. I'm in Pacific time. So I like launching around 5, 6 a.m. And my body subconsciously knows that. And I always just seem to sleep really, really light. And there is a bit of anxiety for sure, especially if it's a new property or it's something we've never tried before. But it's much less than before. I think specifically for this campaign, because of how difficult of a year it's been all around with supply chain issues and cash flow issues, that there was a lot of anxiety to make sure that we got this one right. So for the first week, I was checking it pretty religiously. I was refreshing every 10, 20 minutes whenever I had some idle time. And I happened to be at San Diego Comic-Con at the same time too. So it was really, really long and big weekend for me. But generally speaking, I would say it's a lot less anxiety. And I'm going through my email list. I'm making sure to get as many people on the pre-backer page as possible, funneling people into that. And those are my main activities before launch.
And talk to me about what it feels like after that first week when you kind of can breathe that sigh of relief. Is it like a rush? How does it really feel, when you see yourself going past some of these major milestones after that first week?
Yeah, it feels really good, especially this campaign. This last year has been really, really tough in so many ways for not just me, but for a lot of people, especially in the crowdfunding sector. And for us specifically, we're trying to get a number of campaigns done this year, but we ended up being blocked because of fulfillment issues that we've since solved. But knowing that and knowing what was on the line for our company for this Kickstarter, it was pretty anxious going into it. And seeing the numbers go up it's always a really, really great feeling. It's even better when your peers are with you at a convention and they're able to kind of congratulate you and commiserate on what a difficult year the journey has been thus far.
So for you, it sounds like this really meant a lot. And was it, I guess, people showing up and really expressing that, hey, we want this to exist? Or was it you just having more projects that are now in the pipeline? What do you feel like at the end of the day this meant to you?
Yeah, I think this one specifically is pretty symbolic because it was our first ever project that we're finally bringing to fruition. So that's feeling a catharsis, I think, of completion, a milestone in our careers. And we knew that the fan base was out there, right? We've heard over so many years that people were just waiting for the collected edition and they can't wait to actually have that in their collections. So we kind of knew that was there, but at the same time, you never know. And there's always sort of an internal number that you're looking at, right? And there's a lot of the campaign builders, they have a public facing number and they have an internal number. And it's like, okay, if we hit that internal number, that means we're golden. And for us, that was really, really anxiety inducing because we weren't sure what the response was going to be exactly, but you can tell fairly well after the first 48 hours, I would say, the trajectory of the campaign overall. So after the first 48 hours, it was like, okay, great. I think we're going to hit that number. I think we'll be fine.
Off to the races. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. So one of the takeaways I see from our pre-interview was really about providing value for your hardcore fans. I was wondering if you could expand on that point a tiny bit. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So I think that one of the biggest influences to the overall success of the campaign is not just your overall backer number, which we've grown consistently over the years, but your average pledge number, right? So if your average pledge number is $15 over 1,000 backers, it's going to be very different than if it was $40 over 1,000 backers. And using that framework to analyze what you can do to provide value for your backers, especially the ones that have been with you the longest, right? The ones that have been with you for every single campaign or most of the campaigns over the years, who open your mailing list emails consistently early, who funnel into the pre-order backers, those are the backers that want to support you financially the most. So for a large portion of our early years, we were actually doing the opposite. We would have early bird specials and we would discount our rewards for our early backers. And not only that, because we were doing it on a serial release, we were releasing single issue comics, we were looking at, $15 per issue, which would then be cut down to $10 per issue for an early bird special or something like that, which in hindsight really didn't make a lot of sense because these backers are really eager to support you and give you more money if the rewards are there. So a lot of comic projects in recent years have innovated in a way by providing a lot of variant covers and a lot of other knickknacks and whatnot. So instead of $15 for the standard issue, if they're doing a single comic, they'll offer, for instance, a $25 variant cover or a $35 variant cover, or a package where it's $60 for 3 covers or something like that. And that will ultimately raise your per average for each backer because those backers that are coming in early will be backing at a higher level. That will be raising your overall take over the first 48, 72 hours, which then increases your visibility and so on and so forth.
Got it. So kind of even one of the ways you can hit your goal faster is just making sure that the people that show up, by raising their overall amount that they're contributing, you can hit your goal faster than if you didn't do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So one other thing I was kind of curious about, and this is really just, I think, from your background here, which is that you teach a lot when it comes to entrepreneurship and creativity. It sounds like when you're doing that, do you find like there are any lessons that you're continually repeating or continuing to come back to when it comes to teaching?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that is really important is authenticity. I think that if you believe in what you're doing and that you're authentic and transparent to the people about what you're doing in terms of your presentation, in terms of what's going on actually, in terms of your numbers, that ultimately is a large determinant of your overall success. Of course, the product, the service has to be there. It has to be with something that's high quality. But if all of your ducks are in order, I always tell my students, right, like that's what makes the difference qualitatively. Like the numbers have to be there, the product has to be there. But if they can feel your enthusiasm, if they know your product, your service inside and out, then you're golden.
Do you feel like that manifests in the video? Is that in your copy? Where does that really show up when it comes to your page or your communications?
I think it's everything. The video is certainly really important. The copy is important. I think it all goes together. I think that most successful projects have just a level of polish on them, right? A level of professionalism where it seems like they know what they're doing. That's a subconscious thing, right? Like when you look at something and maybe the art is really good, but the copy isn't there or it's presented in a kind of sloppy way, then that's a bit of a red flag subconsciously for your backers. Same thing if the video is not good or if there's no video. There's all sorts of factors, but I think that they're looking to build that trust, right? You're looking to build that trust and they're looking for somebody who can execute and not just have a great presentation, create something that's awesome, but that can ultimately execute. So things like your previous track record really come into play, but for your new backers, it's just the overall presentation of everything that's important.
Got it. And like you said, that adds a lot to the trust and the credibility. I also imagine that it just makes people feel like once you're actually fulfilling the rewards, that you're going to do a good job, right? Like if you did a good job with the campaign, usually you can also carry that effort through, right? When it comes to the actual product, I imagine.
Definitely. I think that, yeah, it's sort of like the X factor. It's the overall professionalism, or how fake it till you make it, right? Is what they often say, is like fake it till you make it. But if you're able to quote unquote fake it, right, it just means that you're able to raise your game up to the level where you look like a professional. And if you're able to continue doing that through the fulfillment process, then guess what? At a certain point, you are a professional, right? So I think that's what that means.
Having done this so many times and having such great artwork that's out there and really being able to kind of get this almost down to a science, do you feel like there are any secrets when it comes to launching a great campaign or getting great work out there that people just don't talk about enough?
Sure. I don't think it's rocket science. I always tell people who ask for advice is I can basically boil down my crowdfunding advice to a single analogy. It's a snowball rolling down a hill. If you make your snowball as big as possible while it's at the top of the hill, it's going to be even bigger when it rolls down to the bottom. So what that means is you want to get as many people backing your project on over the first 72 hours. And that's it. That's the formula. So however you can funnel people to the project, whether it's your friends or family, if it's your first time out, or if you have a mailing list and getting people to that pre-order page or the pre-launch page, when you have a mailing list, whatever means possible, that's what you need to be doing. You need to be promoting it so that people are going to be supporting you over those first 72 hours. And if you are able to do that, the algorithm will take care of the rest.
What role do you feel like social media plays in all of this?
Social media is super important, but social media is almost the opposite when it comes to their algorithms. So through TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, whatever the case may be, you're looking for consistency, right? You're not necessarily looking for a lot of people to come to your page all at once, but you're looking to build that over time by being consistent in social media. And there's definitely a crossover. There's a crossover in every facet, but I think that social media is ultimately a long-term game. That's when you can engage in your fans outside of crowdfunding. And that's when your long tail is, when you're getting people to your e-commerce store or any other sort of channels that you have set up. For instance, I was at Gen Con this past week and I had a number of fans come up to me and say that they've seen my TikToks on RPG stuff, and they bought product there right there and then. I've only been doing TikTok for about, 6 weeks now. But I can clearly see conversion from that just through my short time doing it, because it's that thing about the thing about advertising overall is just the more mind share that you have, the more that they're exposed to you as a brand or your products, the more likely they are to hit that yes button, right? So when you're doing even like social media ads through BackerKit or some other broker, oftentimes it's not even about the first time you're doing it, right? It's about the 15th time that they've seen it and finally go, okay, I'll check it out. Let's see what this is. And of those people that do that, there's a percentage that are going to go, hey, this is actually pretty cool. I'm actually going to click through. But it's never... advertising is never just a show once and they're going to buy type of thing. It's a long-term game. There's a reason why big companies buy billboards, right? Nobody ever has directly bought anything from a billboard, but it's just planting that seed subconsciously so that it kind of subtly nudges them in that direction, so that when they finally are at the store, they'll pick up a Coke over, say, like a Pepsi or something like that.
It's so interesting. So it almost seems like in your mind, you don't really make a distinguishing difference between social media and advertising or all these other mediums. It's more of like, how many times are people actually seeing you? How much mind share do you have of that person? And you're kind of using that more so to benchmark the fan, right?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit cynical of me now that you put it that way. But I think that one factor that you do need in social media, though, specifically, is authenticity. That's a big one. And that's a big one in crowdfunding too, right? Like, that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, if you're authentic in your copy, if you're authentic in your presentation, then you're going to do much better than if you're not. Same thing with social media. It's about putting a face to it, right? It's about putting a face or a voice to the work at the end of the day. At least it is with TikTok, which is what I'm really focused on now. People really love seeing faces and talking to people, interacting with people via that camera, via that short form video content. And if you're able to be passionate about your niche and on what you're talking about, I think that the audience will follow for that.
Awesome, man. So I do have some more questions on the marketing front. Before we get into that, I really want to understand more of your passion, right? Because You've been doing this for a long time, and you also have done a lot of other creative endeavors and creative work. For you, what do you feel like is, the moment when you feel like you realize like, okay, this is exactly what I wanted. This is when, you have your celebration of success. Is that when you see the artwork coming together in people's hands? Is that when you see the campaign being successfully funded? Is that you just even going through the process of getting the artwork done? What do you feel about that?
I think the best validation is when you are able to meet your fans face to face at conventions for me, because I do a lot of comic conventions, I do a lot of board game conventions, and just hearing that they've backed your games, backed your comics. And I had one super fan recently of our other comic Glow. He came up to me at Gen Con and he started describing about how engrossed he was with the world of Glow and that he couldn't stop thinking about it. So he ended up running a role-playing campaign based off of the Glow. And he was describing to me his extrapolation of the world based off of what we presented. And he was really, really close, which is pretty amazing. He's really, really close to our own internal backstory, our own world Bibles. And based off of the fact that we just have 4 issues out and that we are not really exposition heavy, it was amazing, astounding, really, how close he got to the actual truth of the world. And that was incredible because it just shows you that this guy, he really understood that what we were going for, so much so that he was able to reconstruct it based off of what we had thus far into where we were going. So moments like that are what make it all worth it, to be honest, especially for comics and RPGs, because ultimately at the end of the day, there's not like a lot of money in this, right? Like comics is a very, very small industry, and same thing with role-playing games. Board games is a lot bigger, but I'm really interested more in RPGs. That's really my passion, and I do it because I love it. I love these things. I love telling stories. I love building worlds, and that's why I chose this type of career. So seeing people who equally appreciate that come up to you and express that appreciation, that's the ultimate form of validation.
When it comes to telling stories and being able to impact other people like that, is that something that you feel like you've been influenced by other creators to really value that and to want to go after that? Or is that just something you've naturally had your entire life?
Yeah, I think it's something that I've always valued my entire life. I always was a dreamer. I always was a storyteller. I have always been a geek. So if you were to tell my 14-year-old self what I do now, I make comics and games and blah, 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 all this and that, I think my 14-year-old self would be really, really wowed, right? Really, really impressed. Be like, whoa, that's awesome. And actually, that's one of the things that gives me a lot of credibility when I teach high schoolers is when they find out that I make comics and games, they're always like, whoa, that's so cool. But, the grass is always greener, right? Like now as an adult, now having done this for close to 10 years, I can say that as much success as I have on Kickstarter, it's not all like peaches and roses when it comes to things financially, right? Like I'm doing okay, but I'm still building my company. Ultimately, I'm still building my brand, and it's not like I have like $1 million house anywhere or whatnot. And running, yeah. So like facing that and the growing pains of growing up in adulthood is kind of interesting. But I do think that the grass is always greener because I talked to some of my peers, my friends who took more conventional routes or in high-paying corporate jobs, and a lot of them at my age, I'm 33, are like, man, I just kind of want to quit and I want to go start my own thing, right? And I'm so envious about what you're doing. So I kind of couch that with like, well, yes, but also you have a mortgage now, and I am far from that, and you have this and that, and blah 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 blah. So it's all relative, I think. But if I wouldn't do it any other way, I guess. If I were to do it all over again, I would still choose this path.
So one follow-up question I had for you was on the point of telling stories. Why do you feel like that is so gratifying to not only tell stories, but to have people hear those? Why do you feel like that's something that's very gratifying?
Yeah, I think it's because stories are everything. So what I mean by that is stories fundamentally reflect our human nature, our ability to change. That's what stories are about, right? A story is always someone who wants something, who tries to get something, and whether or not they get that something, they change. That's the monomyth. That's the structure of a story, right? And it really reflects how we grow and develop over time. Our understanding of things is always based off of our wants, our desires, to that point of relativity. We want something, we go for it, we get it, and we change, and our desires change. So I think stories are absolutely fundamentally universal. What is one of the first things that you tell little kids as soon as they're able to talk? You tell them stories, right? You give them books to read. So stories are such an ingrained part of our humanity, to the point where I would say that they're core to our humanity. And that's why I think stories are important. And I think that's why they have value.
Yeah, I mean, that's so well said. And I think as well, just seeing people kind of rally around you and be able to watch you and even like see your TikToks, they're almost watching your story unfold, right? As well, when it comes to
Yeah,
comes to the campaign, which is so cool. It's like happening in real time, right?
yeah, absolutely. It's totally a weird meta thing. Like, I think that's what crowdfunding really allows you to do too. Since we're still relatively early and it is sort of seeing the life cycle of these creators and any other social media platform for that matter too, with YouTubers or whatnot is the same where you're watching them grow and learn in real time and you're supporting them from the beginning of their careers, which is awesome.
So I just have one or two more questions for you here. One is on fulfillment. I think it's a really important topic just because it's not really discussed very much. Do you have any advice on that front for beginning creators? I know that you've obviously gone through that experience with COVID, et cetera. Do you have any thoughts on that or any advice to impart?
Oh man, yeah, that could be an entire hour, 2 hour discussion. To be honest, fulfillment is vast and complicated. But what I will say is, what I've learned is learn the terminology, learn what you're looking for. If you decide to go with a warehouse, right? It's not necessarily the ones that have the most advertising. Understand that logistics is a big, big, big category. Every city in the entire world has some sort of logistics, right? Every city, every place has warehouses. Everybody needs to ship stuff. So it's a big, wide world out there for fulfillment. But learn the terminology so that you're not just sort of sucked in by people who are advertising to your specific category. In our case, crowdfunding or board games or whatnot, right? There are many, many different options out there. There's tons and tons of players doing e-commerce, and make sure you find a partner that has the same ambition and is roughly the same size as you. I think that's the most important point. You don't want someone who's too small, who won't be able to handle what you're doing, but you also don't want someone who's too big, who won't prioritize what you're doing because they have other clients who are much larger. That's really important. And then the other tip I would say, stay local. Like, we decided to go with a 3PL company that was very far from us. I'm looking in Los Angeles. And in hindsight, that was a huge mistake because I don't understand why I would decide to move my product halfway around the country in hindsight to fulfill to the rest of the country when I have a huge port right here and I have tons and tons of warehousing options over here. So that was a really, really big lesson that I've learned over the past year.
Got it. Well said. So my final question before we get into, where we can check you out, et cetera, is you did mention this splintering, right, that was happening within the crowdfunding industry, and we kind of glossed over that. I was wondering if you could kind of describe more what you meant by that or what your insights or thoughts are on that.
Sure. So specifically, the largest category in crowdfunding is the tabletop category segment, right? That's where you have the biggest campaigns these days. BackerKit just announced, and it's already live, that I think they're soft launching it right now with just a handful, a dozen or so of projects, but they have crowdfunding native to their platform now. BackerKit is, everybody listening to this is probably familiar, but they started off as a post-survey fulfillment tool before moving into advertising. And now they've captured something like 60-70% of all emails that have ever been on Kickstarter, right? So they have a huge, huge grasp of what the segment is. And they're really driving the growth of that through their board game segments. They have the developer of Gloomhaven and Frosthaven, which I think are like the largest board game Kickstarters ever. They've promised, they've probably signed a contract to do their next project on BackerKit, which should bring in a lot of people. And GameFound is another big player that I've seen recently where they've had multiple 100,000, close to $1 million campaigns. And they're a company I know they're not based in the United States, but I don't know where. And they started off also as a post-fulfillment pre-order system that is now going into crowdfunding natively. So I think those two players and other players emerging, coupled with some of the recent kind of bad PR that Kickstarter has been getting, specifically, I think I can trace it back to when the staff members were trying to unionize, and there was a big talk among the community about supporting the unions and discussion about like best practices within Kickstarter. And then when they decided to go to blockchain-based system, I think that there was a lot of backlash when they announced that has led to people more willing to try other things. I'm not really sure how it's going to pan out. I think short term, it's probably good because it provides for marketing opportunities for creators. Like if you're of a sizable amount to go with BackerKit or GameFound, you'll probably get really, really great deals on that in terms of their native support for you because they want to prove that their platform is going to be a success. So if you have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 backers consistently, they're probably going to support you with reduced marketing rates and stuff like that with their ads and whatnot. But long term, The reason why Kickstarter has been successful is because it is the people synonymously associate crowdfunding with Kickstarter. And that brings in a lot of people, and it has its own culture about things, right? And everything in all realities is always consolidation, dissemination, right? So I'm not sure if the beginning stages of dissemination are ultimately going to be good long term, but that's sort of me being very macro and philosophical about things. And who knows how it's going to play out in the immediate term in the next couple of years.
Okay, very interesting, very interesting. So we'll have to have more discussion on that in the future. But awesome, man. Where can people go to learn more about your project and what you're doing here?
Sure. So if this goes live within the next 7 days, this is 8/10 right now while we're recording it, then I'll have a Kickstarter for the Skies of Fire Collected Edition. And if not, you can find our work at www.myth.works.
Great. And my final question for you, and we can end on this note, is if you can speak directly to listeners and you can end on either an inspirational quote that you like, it could be a final tip, it could be something you wish you knew, it could be just a word of encouragement, anything along those lines, so we can end on that note.
I would say just go for it. Honestly, like you never know until you try. I believe that you can achieve anything that you put your mind to. But there's always going to be a cost, and that cost won't be immediate to you until you've achieved it. And it will be something that you don't expect or think about at the time. But so long as you put the effort, time, and energy into it, then you'll be able to achieve it, at least in my experience.
Well said, well said. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it, and good luck with your next projects.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman. Hope you took away some valuable lessons from today's show, and you also go and you implement them. If nothing else, I hope that this week you really have taken a little bit of action. And still, the week is not finished, that you also take some action in the next couple of days. Why not? Whether it's after work, whether it's on the weekends, carving out an hour here, carving out an hour there, the more that you actually invest in moving this boulder up the hill, the more you actually invest in this passion project, in this hobby, in this thing that you want to do full time, or it could be something completely new that you're bringing into the universe. Whatever it is, the more that you invest in this, the more that great things can come. You got to be committed. You got to be focused. And I know that if you were not committed and were not focused, you would not have made it to the end of this particular episode. So I'm glad that it was useful and helpful. And in addition, I think this is a great way to upgrade your education and to get to this point where you're like, you know what, Sal, I've been listening to your podcast here and there, and I really do feel like I can do a campaign, but I just feel like there are a couple pieces that are missing, a couple pieces of the puzzle and I haven't really filled in. And I'd really like to understand that more, maybe even know if I should do a campaign, or for those of you out there that are more seasoned, just want to do it better the next time around. If that sounds like you and you really want to get access to me when it comes to doing one of these campaigns, you can always book a one-on-one coaching call with me. This is something that I'm not necessarily always doing, but I am available now when it comes to doing one-on-one coaching calls. So these are extremely intensive calls. I should definitely be prepared. Basically, when we do these calls, not only to go through every aspect of running a campaign, what you need to know, what you should be aware of when it comes to resources, people you should know in the industry, success stories that are relevant for you, all that kind of stuff we talk about on one-on-one coaching calls. These are basically intensive coaching calls. In addition, going into what you should be aware of, what you might have thought of when it comes to doing a campaign. So I really try to bring my A game to these sessions, make them extremely practical, very useful, and almost like this reservoir of gold that you get in a very tight-knit session that's also specific and tailored to you. And I'm telling you, man, every single time I do one of these calls, people are just blown away with the value that they receive on them. If you're interested in learning more about this and also filling out this form and getting a little bit of information there, basically you can go to this link, give me a bit of information about you, and we can get that call scheduled ASAP. All you got to do is go to the link I'm about to mention at crowdcrux.com/coaching. That link is crowdcrux.com/coaching, crowdcrux.com/coaching. We'll take you there and you can fill out a little bit of information and we can get that call scheduled away. That being said, man, go and check out some of my other episodes as well. If you are a frequent listener of this podcast, it means so much to me if you would leave a positive rating and review. Stay tuned, because actually, I think next week's episode is going to be killer, is going to be insane. I really think you're going to like next week's episode, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But that being said, again, my name is Salvador Briggman, and I will see you next time.